Um, so the question on the floor today is, will anything change in the coming years in our relations with China and China's relations with the rest of the world? And what I'm going to try to do today, and I'm going to keep my remarks to about 15 minutes if I can, to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. I just want to set the stage for you as to where things stand now. So I think for most of us in this meeting, we very well understood the old Chinese foreign policy of Deng Xiaoping, which was basically speak softly and carry a big stick. But he believed very much in multilateralism, in just keeping it as quiet as possible. But in the past 8 years, in other words, since 2013, and in the past 3 years in particular, China has tossed the stricture away. And it is impossible to credit this change to anything other than the ascent of China's most powerful leader since Mao, the people's leader, and many, many other titles are now his that only Mao held previously. So let's look at some of the things some of the areas where this so-called wolf warrior foreign policy has been most in evidence. I think the most obvious is the South China Sea. And I remember 5 years ago talking to foreign policy experts who were very, very puzzled by China's new aggressiveness in that area, because they had been accomplishing so much in the previous decades in terms of building their influence in the region without being so abrupt about it. And this side shows no sign of weakening. They are in commercial and territorial disputes with just about everybody in the region, including, to me, most amazingly, Indonesia, with the Chinese Coast Guard and its sort of privateer fishing fleet being very, very aggressive in the region. And it turns out that China has other plans for its Coast Guard. They are now giving it even more authority to operate well beyond China's borders. They've also weaponized trade in a way that makes membership in the World Trade Organization somewhat mute. These are just some of the examples. I think many of you will remember what happened when South Korea agreed to deploy the THAAD missile defense system. South Korean department stores, tourism, pop culture, all were boycotted. For a while, China stopped exports of rare earths to Japan, which are crucial for any high-tech industries. And as you probably all know, lately, Australia has been on the receiving end of repeated trade sanctions, the most recent being wine, of all things. Taiwan. China tried very, very desperately to interfere and influence Taiwan's presidential election and failed miserably. And since then, the PLA has ramped up military activities all around Taiwan, aerial incursions and many and maritime as well. Her host, who used to go to China, is the way that China has begun to engage in what can only be called hostage diplomacy. The arrest of the daughter of the founder of Huawei, the CFO, by Canada at the U.S. at the request of the U.S. Was followed almost immediately by the arrest of 2 Canadians, and who it's now 2 years are still in jail. I know many people in Hong Kong, especially, who no longer, who were did business in China, or were researchers who are now quite afraid to actually go to China. Australia, China has issued a series of 14 demands that in order to restore relations which are completely unacceptable to any country. And that's bad enough, but in addition, and this is where the sort of wolf warrior diplomacy issue comes along. This is a photograph, a photoshopped photograph that was, it's been pixelated because it's so disgusting. It's a picture of an Australian soldier slitting the throat of a young Afghani. And this was not created by the Chinese government, but it was retweeted by China's foreign ministry spokesman. I can't imagine any diplomat that I've ever met, any diplomatic service I've ever met, that would tolerate or endorse such a thing. For the first time in 42 years, there's actual shooting between India and China. China has become very, very aggressive in terms of its claims to parts of the border area that have been in dispute for many, many years. Why now? Why has it become so important now to be so aggressive? And even Bhutan, I don't know how many of you saw this, but you know, China is actually beginning to build villages around the region, not just inside the South China Sea, but right on the border. And this is aerial photographs that show a Chinese village, a militarized village, that is actually inside Bhutan's border. And perhaps most upsetting, and I think perhaps the thing that has had the biggest impact on the view of the rest of the world about China, is the way it weaponized the supply chain after COVID-19. Countries that said nice things about China got supplies. Countries that didn't say nice things about China were cut off. Quite absolutely, I think, unprecedented use of that power. And then there's Hong Kong. Over the past year, Hong Kong has gone from one country to two systems to one country, one system. This is Joshua Wong on the left, that's Jimmy Lai on the right, both being carted off. These are peaceful protesters, political dissenters. And under the new rules, the new security law China has enforced, they have basically shut down all dissent. So most people know about this, but one of the things that we have to talk about if we're talking about the current situation is the response. Because as China's foreign policy has become more and more aggressive, more and more people are resisting. So for example, the US was very, very much trying to get European countries to not let Huawei into their 5G systems. And that wasn't working that well until the COVID-19 response, and some of the other issues that have happened, when the European countries have begun to believe that they cannot trust China as a trading partner. In some places in Central Europe, Hornik is a Czech name, so I like to talk about the Czechs. The mayor of Prague has embraced relations with Taiwan. The Chinese tried to force him not to do that, and the Czechs have pushed back. They are ignoring China's blandishments. Militarily, this is I don't know if this is going to happen, but India, Japan, Australia, and the United States have begun to cooperate militarily in the region in a way that is China cannot be pleased about. But it's one of these things where their pushing has resulted in pushback, and even Europe is now beginning to reject China's 9-dash line more aggressively. And the other blowback is that, and this is bad for China, Chinese companies are finding it more difficult to do business overseas. India was one of its biggest tech markets, but in the last 6 months, that market has dried up and hundreds of Chinese companies have, apps have been banned, and dozens of Chinese tech companies have abandoned the India market for now. So the question is, why? And although it's never, we used to say when I was a correspondent in Beijing, you're not allowed to ask the why question because you'll never find out. But I think we can make some assumptions. First of all, this aggressiveness reflects Xi Jinping's philosophy. Deng Xiaoping was a consensus builder and an incrementalist. Xi believes that political struggles are zero-sum games, as did Mao. You're either with them or against them. Another reason is that Xi's subordinates, his diplomats, his military people, they are playing to an audience of one. So when China's foreign ministry spokesman posted that picture, he didn't care what the reaction would be in Australia. He only cared what Xi thought. So why would China do what seems to take on such an aggressive attitude that seems to be backfiring? Well, one possibility is that Xi has received faulty intelligence about what's happening. As many of you know, he's centralized all of the government functions into his own personal party office. So the Foreign Affairs Ministry, many of these places are not getting the access they used to. Maybe he's ignored this accurate intelligence because he thinks he knows better. Maybe he simply overplayed his hand. Or, and this is a reason that I often come back to, maybe the situation, the domestic situation in China is more troubling to Xi than we thought. And as you know, the Communist Party of China has two pillars of legitimacy: economic growth and nationalism. And when the economy is not doing well, then what they're left with is nationalism. So, so is China ready for a change? This was the Chinese ambassador to the United States recently threw out a little bit of an olive branch via Twitter of all things, saying that perhaps there should be, work more in the spirit of no conflict, no confrontation. And certainly Biden's China policy will be different, if similar. So very briefly, there seems to be three schools of thought within the Democratic Party on China: the competitors, the centrists, and the optimists. And the new NSC chief, Jake Sullivan, is definitely a competitor. As he wrote a year ago, there is a growing consensus that the engagement with China, the era of engagement with China, has come to an unceremonious close. And so I think, there will be, the US and China will continue to be at odds, obviously. Nothing's going to change overnight. But the one, I think, big strategic difference will be that Joe Biden will be much more multilateral. This is a quote from him given to Tom Friedman in the New York Times just a week ago. One of the many criticisms of Trump's China policy wasn't that he wasn't going after the right sort of issues. It was that he was doing it alone and that he would have much more power, much more effectiveness if he worked with other countries. So I think I'll close there.